Before we dive into tonight's tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want more creepy stories that will keep you up at night. I never thought that driving an ambulance could be both my salvation and my damnation. But here I am, 6 months into the job, and every shift feels like I'm driving straight into a trap I can't escape. I was hired by Mr. Carter, a man you'd never peg for anything but old-fashioned quirks. He's the hospital administrator at Alabaster Heights Private Hospital, a place as modern as they come with state-of-the-art tech and a reputation so spotless you'd think it was built on dreams. I remember my first day vividly. My partner, Lena, she used to be a seasoned paramedic, and honestly, she had an uncanny way of knowing when something wasn't right. Looked me square in the eyes and said, "Follow the rules or you'll end up like the others." I didn't know what she meant back then, but I wish I had. That morning, as I climbed into the ambulance, I found something that still sends shivers down my spine. A folded sheet of paper, carefully taped inside the driver's door. It was written in this jagged red ink, almost like someone had carved the words out in a moment of madness. I assumed it was just some weird, offbeat quirk from the hospital management. But as June crept closer to its climax, I started to realize these rules were more than just eccentric guidelines. They were a set of orders, binding for both the living and those who aren't really here anymore. The rules, I still remember reading them, each one chillingly clear. Rule 1, primary drop-offs must be at Alabaster Heights Private Hospital. Rule 2, if a patient mentions seeing the other hospital, do not look where they're pointing. Rule 3, return patients can be transported to any hospital except Alabaster Heights. Rule 4, if you arrive at Alabaster Heights and the building appears different, circle the block exactly 3 times. Rule 5, the elevator to the 7th floor is strictly off limits. I tucked the paper away thinking I'd laugh about it someday. But as the days went by, each rule started to seem like a piece of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. And now, every shift, every call, seems to be a reminder that some rules are written in stone, for reasons far darker than I ever imagined. June 9th, 2023. That humid June night marked the beginning of something I couldn't quite explain. After receiving the call about a 52-year-old man in cardiac arrest, I drove to a quiet suburban home where everything seemed ordinary at first glance. I stepped up to the front door and entered the house to find the patient lying motionless in his living room. I followed the standard protocol, setting up for CPR in the living room that was sparsely furnished and unremarkable in every way. As I applied the necessary compressions, something in the routine went suddenly askew. In the middle of the procedure, the man's eyes abruptly opened. The sudden change caught me off guard, not in a cinematic or overly dramatic way, but simply because it defied the ordinary mechanics of resuscitation. His pupils, strangely clouded white, locked onto mine. Before I could process the unexpected change, his hand, despite the pallor of death, clenched my wrist with surprising firmness. In a tone that was rough and deliberate, he said, "They're boiling in the walls. Can't you smell it?" The words were delivered in a way that left no room for misinterpretation, even as I wrestled with the situation. Almost immediately afterward, the cardiac monitor I'd been watching flatlined. I checked the connections, wondering if a technical glitch was to blame, but then the screen flickered back to life, displaying something I hadn't anticipated, a set of coordinates. I quickly secured the patient onto the gurney, following the proper procedures, and radioed dispatch. "Dispatch, this is Mitchell. I've got a 52-year-old in arrest, but something's not right. The monitor just showed coordinates instead of a rhythm," I reported in a measured tone. The response I received was curt and clipped, no acknowledgement of the call, nothing in the records. It was as if the entire incident had been scrubbed. With a mix of professional concern and growing uncertainty, I drove to Alabaster Heights. When I arrived, the usual organized chaos of the hospital was missing the patient entirely. I checked the gurney carefully. It was empty. I pulled out my phone and tried contacting dispatch again. "Dispatch, confirm if there's a patient in transit to Alabaster Heights from a call I just received," I asked, keeping my voice even. The reply was a flat denial. No record of any call, no record of any patient. That night, as I returned to the ambulance, I noticed something inexplicable. The floor, normally marked by the routine cleanliness of the station, was covered in a thin layer of ash. I didn't dwell on the texture or temperature. It was simply an anomaly, a stark reminder that the events of that evening defied routine explanation. It wasn't a matter of feeling unnerved by the ash or the call, but rather a realization that something was fundamentally off in the way the night had unfolded. I logged the incident in my report, making sure to note every detail: the coordinates on the monitor, the patient's final cryptic words, the empty gurney, and the absence of any record in dispatch logs. There was no easy way to rationalize it. In the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the thought that the rules I'd been given might be more than just idle guidelines. They were starting to form a pattern, a connection between calls that shouldn't exist in a normal world. Even now, as I review that night's log, I can't help but wonder about the truth behind those coordinates and the unyielding set of rules that had been taped inside the ambulance. They're not just there to keep order, they seem to be guiding me into events I never signed up for, events that stretch the boundaries of what's possible. June 10th, 2023. The next morning, Lena and I got a call from dispatch about a pediatric burn incident at a local park. I remember pulling up to the park and noticing the usual bustle of early morning routines, joggers, dog walkers, and the rustle of newspapers being delivered. But then I saw her, a small girl, about 7, sitting alone on a weathered bench. She was clutching a battered teddy bear, its one eye missing and patches of stuffing escaping like secrets too heavy to keep hidden. I approached slowly, speaking in a calm, measured tone. "Hi there, sweetheart. I'm here to help you," I said as Lena knelt down beside her. The girl's eyes darted between us, and with a trembling voice, she murmured, "Mommy works at the other hospital. She's still screaming in the basement." Her words struck a nerve, hinting at something more than just a simple accident. As we carefully lifted her onto the gurney, Lena double-checked her tablet. That's when her face went blank for a moment. Her file was marked as deceased, with a recorded date of June 12, 2023. We both exchanged a look that said, without words, that this was no ordinary call. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, not out of panic, but because I knew things were taking an unexpected turn. Without warning, the GPS on the dashboard started to act up. It flickered and then locked onto a set of coordinates. I followed the display's directions, expecting to find a routine destination. But as I arrived, I saw something I wasn't prepared for. A building that bore the unmistakable look of Alabaster Heights. Its modern glass facade shone under the morning sun, every line and angle pristine, yet something was off. I pulled the ambulance into the lot, and through the wide front windows I noticed a nurse beckoning from a window on what appeared to be the 7th floor. Now, I knew Alabaster Heights was built with only 6 floors. This was a glaring anomaly. I double-checked the GPS, and sure enough, it insisted on these coordinates. I tried to shake off the confusion and recalled the rule clearly. Rule 4. If you arrive at Alabaster Heights and the building appears different, circle the block exactly 3 times. I parked the ambulance carefully and stepped out to circle the block. I counted in my head as I made the loops, deliberately following the instruction word for word. After the 3rd complete circuit, I looked back and couldn't believe my eyes. The building was gone. In its place was nothing but a smoldering crater, the charred remains of a structure that should have been standing proud. I rushed back to the ambulance and searched for the little girl in the back. The seat where she had been secured was empty. I called out, "Lena, where is she?" But there was no answer from her, and the only sound was the faint echo of what might have been her soft cry, lingering in the silence. I sat there for a long moment, trying to make sense of it all. The coordinates, the vanished building, the girl's eerie words, all of it didn't add up. I radioed dispatch again, my voice steady as I recounted every detail, but the line remained dead to any sensible explanation. It wasn't just a day that defied expectations. It was a series of events that left me questioning whether I was still in control of the situation. The rules, those cryptic instructions, were no longer just a curiosity taped inside the driver's door. They were directives guiding me through scenarios that no conventional logic could explain. I logged the incident in my report, every single detail, from the girl's whispered claim about her mother working at the other hospital, to the inexplicable appearance of a seventh floor and the final vanishing act. Every element of that morning made it clear that I was caught in something far beyond a normal day's work, a puzzle with pieces that defied reality and rules that seemed to have a will of their own. June 11th, 2023. That evening, the storm was in full swing, a barrage of rain and wind that seemed determined to knock the power out of the entire block. As I received the call to transport a critically injured patient from a lower ward to the emergency bay, I knew things might be far from routine. With the hospital's main power out and only emergency lights flickering in the corridors, I hesitated briefly, weighing the risks. Still, protocol demanded I act, so I steeled myself and headed into the building. Inside, the hallways were dimly lit by weak, pulsating bulbs that barely cut through the shadows. I found myself navigating through corridors that, under normal circumstances, would have been nothing more than a passage to get the job done. But tonight, every step felt loaded with uncertainty. I reached the elevator, a creaking, old metal box that was hardly built for emergencies, and pressed the button for the 6th floor, expecting a routine ascent. The elevator groaned to life, and as it began its climb on backup power, I glanced up at the digital display. To my astonishment, the number flickered from 6 to 7. I frowned, wondering if it was a malfunction, but then the doors slid open slowly. Instead of the familiar 6th floor landing, I was greeted by a long, eerie hallway that I didn't recognize, a hallway that carried a faint, disturbing odor of burnt hair and charred fabric. It wasn't the scent of a fire that had been recently doused. It was something else entirely, something that hinted at an incident from the past. I stepped out, my mind racing with questions. Down the hall, strapped to gurneys, were several patients. Their movements were synchronized in a way that felt almost rehearsed. Their faces were disconcertingly contorted, some with features that seemed to be melting or distorting, and others with vacant, hollow stares. I distinctly remember one patient's eyes seemed to be in disarray, with a few stray, detached remnants of what should have been intact. In unison, their voices, soft, almost like a murmur, seemed to echo in the confined space. "You left us here." I backed away, pressing the closed door button repeatedly, as if sheer force might override the situation. The elevator's control panel beeped in protest, and soon enough, I found myself back inside the metal box. I could hardly believe what I had witnessed. The ascent back down was silent, except for the hum of the emergency motor. When the doors finally slid open at what should have been the correct floor, the hallway I'd just seen was gone, replaced by the usual sterile corridor I'd grown accustomed to. All that remained was a fresh layer of ash scattered on the floor, as if someone had dusted it deliberately. Later that night, I sat in the hospital's back office, reviewing the shaky security footage from the elevator. The images were grainy, but one thing was unmistakable. I was trapped in that spectral elevator ride for what by the timestamp should have been only 3 minutes. Yet in the recording, it felt as though I'd been caught in that limbo for what seemed like 12 long hours. I watched, bewildered, as my own reflection flickered between states of fear and resignation, an echo of a man who was forced to confront events that defied explanation. That night, I left the office without speaking a word to anyone, my mind churning with questions that the hospital's emergency lights could not illuminate. I couldn't shake off the memory of that hallway, the patient's almost mournful accusation, and the confounding passage of time that the elevator had manipulated. Each of those moments felt like a silent command, another cryptic message from the rules taped inside my ambulance door. A message that was slowly but surely drawing me deeper into a mystery that I couldn't run from. June 12th, 2023. It was around 3 a.m. when the GPS started acting up again, its screen flickering like it was shorting out. I tapped it a few times, but then the coordinates reappeared, the same damned ones that had haunted my every shift. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, knuckles paling under the pressure. Inside the cab, the air felt stifling, like the oxygen was being siphoned out. The wheel itself was scorching, and I jerked my hands away, staring down at the red, angry skin on my palms. From the back of the ambulance, muffled groans twisted into tortured wails. I glanced in the rearview mirror and nearly choked on my own breath. 3 patients were writhing on the gurneys, their skin bubbling and peeling away like wax under a blowtorch. I didn't know how they'd gotten there. I hadn't loaded them, and Lena was nowhere in sight. Their voices rose into a horrible, dissonant chant, the words hitting me like a physical blow. You lit the match. Finish it. I didn't remember lighting any match, but the way they said it, as if I was the sole architect of their suffering, made it feel like a forgotten truth. My foot pressed down on the gas, and I found myself driving, following the GPS like a puppet on strings. The city blurred around me, just shapes and colors, my focus consumed by the throbbing coordinates on the screen. I reached the destination, or what should have been an empty lot. Instead, there stood Alabaster Heights, fully engulfed in flames that reached hungrily into the sky. The glass facade I'd seen gleaming just days before now twisted and warped, melting like a mirage caught in a blaze. Charred figures stumbled out from the inferno, nurses, their uniforms reduced to burnt rags clinging to skeletal forms. Their hollow eyes found me immediately, bony fingers raised in accusation, as if they could see through to the guilt I didn't remember earning. I couldn't look away from the rearview mirror. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't mine, not really. The skin on my face was sloughing off in great wet chunks, exposing muscle and bone beneath. Flames curled around my head, consuming me inch by inch. I wanted to scream, but the man in the mirror was silent, his charred lips pulled back into a grotesque grimace. With trembling hands, I yanked open the glove box, my fingers nearly slipping off the handle. There it was, my employment file. The paper felt heavier than it should, each word a leaden weight dragging me down. Dr. James Mitchell, Head of Emergency Medicine, status, deceased. Cause, arson, June 12, 2023. Victims, 47. I stared at the photo clipped to the file. A man in a crisp white coat, smiling in front of Alabaster Heights. The date was June 12th. The very date that marked my death, a fire that had claimed 47 lives. It hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't driving the ambulance, it was driving me. The calls, the rules, the patients who weren't really there, they were just echoes, ripples from a tragedy I had caused. I wasn't saving lives. I was just another spirit trapped in a loop of my own making, bound to a job that had ended with my own death. The coordinates, the burning building, the patient screams, all of it had been trying to tell me one thing. I was the match that started this fire, and there was no putting it out. June 12th, 2023. The same date on my dispatch log. My mind reeled. This wasn't the anniversary of the fire. It wasn't a new shift. It was still the same night, looping over and over, trapping me in the moment I died. The moment I try to break free from it all, the world around me pulls me back in. It's like I'm caught in the eye of the storm. No escape, no end. The radio crackles with whispers that scrape the edge of my sanity. It's all so familiar now, the cries, the blood, the burning air that seems to cling to every surface of the ambulance. But it's not the worst part. The worst part is knowing this will never stop. I see the faces of the patients, their hollow eyes staring at me from the rearview mirror. Each one a soul trapped, repeating the same agonizing moment of death. Some beg for mercy. Others lash out, furious at being dragged back into this hell with no way out. I want to scream, to pound my fists against the steering wheel and demand it all stop, but I know better. Every night I do the same thing. The same journey, the same doomed ride, the same empty gurney waiting for its next occupant. It's the same now with the rules. I look at them again every time I climb into the driver's seat like a twisted ritual I can't escape. Rule after rule, scrawled in red that never fades, no matter how many times I wipe it away. But now, there's another one. Rule 6, you are the patient. I don't know when it appeared. Maybe it was always there waiting for me to see it. Or maybe it's the universe's way of reminding me what I already knew, that I'm not the one driving anymore. I'm the one who's been lost. At dawn, everything resets. The ashes, the wreckage, it all disappears like it was never there. The gurney sits empty, the back of the ambulance as pristine as it was before the nightmare took hold. But I forget. For just a second, I forget. I think that maybe, just maybe, this time I'll be free. But the moment the clock ticks over, the next shift begins and I'm right back here. The cycle starts again. and I am, as the rules state, the patient. Alabaster Heights still stands, gleaming in the heart of the city, a beacon of sterile hope and cutting-edge medical care. The building's windows reflect the daylight as if nothing happened. The sun rises every morning to kiss its glass facade, and life moves on as though the past never existed. But the truth lingers, hidden beneath the surface, woven into the very foundation of the hospital. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more creepy stories. Stay safe, and see you in the next nightmare.